A simple night at Frank's bar transforms when August faces a group of arrogant young men. But who is he really? His gaze carries secrets from the past and a respect that isn't demanded, but earned. What happens next changes everything and makes Bruno question everything he thought he knew. Frank's bar was one of those places that resisted the passage of time, maintaining its essence intact despite all the changes around it. Located on a busy corner in the old downtown area, the establishment had exposed brick walls and a solid wood counter that held stories from multiple generations. It was early evening when August entered the place, as he had every Thursday for over 2 decades. At 68 years old, August carried the marks of time and experiences that few could imagine on his face. He wore a worn leather jacket that, like him, had stories to tell. His steps were firm and calculated, though slower than in the past. He sat in his usual spot at the counter, the one that allowed him to observe the entire bar through the mirror behind the bottles. "The usual August?" asked Frank, drying a glass with an impeccably white cloth. The bar owner was one of the few who knew fragments of the history of this regular, yet mysterious customer. "Yes, Frank. And bring me something to nibble on too," replied August, his deep and calm voice echoing softly in the still empty bar. The bar gradually filled up, as it did every Thursday. Local shop workers, city hall employees from 2 blocks away, and the usual retirees looking for company to share their stories. August remained silent, sipping his whiskey and observing the movement through the mirror, like a silent guardian of that piece of the city. It was then that the quiet routine of the night was interrupted by the noisy arrival of 5 young men. They were probably between 20 and 25 years old, dressed in brand-name clothes and flaunting gold watches and chains. The leader of the group, a tall guy with shaved sides and a styled topknot, was named Bruno. He was known in the area for being the son of an important businessman and always hanging out with his crew, intimidating people with his pseudo-authority. "Frank, beers for everyone." "And put it on my dad's tab," shouted Bruno, eliciting forced laughter from his companions. The bar owner simply nodded, already accustomed to that kind of behavior. The young men took a table near the counter, deliberately dragging the chairs loudly against the wooden floor. They began talking loudly about their week's conquests, especially how they had dominated the latest party at a famous club in the city. August remained impassive in his seat, but his attentive eyes didn't miss a single movement through the mirror. He noticed when the young men started making comments about the other customers, laughing and discreetly pointing. "Hey, did you see that? This bar looks like a retirement home," said one of the guys, provoking more laughter from the group. Bruno, noticing August sitting alone at the counter, saw an opportunity to entertain his friends. He stood up with a malicious smile on his lips and approached the older man. "What's up, Grandpa? Isn't it a bit late for you to be out?" he teased, leaning on the counter next to August. The silence that followed was thick. Some of the bar's regular customers exchanged worried glances, knowing fragments of August's reputation. Frank stopped drying glasses, watching the scene closely. August slowly turned on his stool, staring at Bruno with a gaze that seemed to pierce his soul. The young man, despite trying to maintain his tough guy pose, felt an involuntary shiver run down his spine. "You know, kid," August began, his calm voice contrasting with the tension in the air, "there's something called respect. Something that apparently wasn't taught to you at home despite all your father's money." Bruno felt his face heat up, a mix of shame and anger bubbling in his chest. His friends approached, forming a semicircle around August. "Listen here, old man," Bruno started, but was interrupted when August stood up. Even though he was a few inches shorter than the young man, his presence was imposing, almost palpable. The sleeve of August's jacket slid up slightly, revealing part of an old tattoo. The partially visible symbols and numbers made Frank, who was watching everything, widen his eyes in recognition. "No, you're the one who's going to listen," said August, his voice even lower but carrying an authority that made the young men instinctively step back. "A long time ago I learned that respect isn't demanded, it's earned. And you, young man, still have a lot to learn about that." The entire bar was silent now, all eyes focused on the scene. Bruno tried to maintain his pose, but something in August's gaze made him want to be anywhere else. You may have money, you may have your imported cars and brand-name clothes, but do you know what you don't have? August continued, calmly adjusting his jacket sleeve. You have no idea what it's like to face real life. You're like those watches you wear, pretty on the outside, but with no substance inside. One of Bruno's friends, trying to defuse the situation, pulled his arm. Let's go, man, it's not worth it. August sat back down, picking up his glass as if nothing had happened. Take your friend's advice, and next time you enter a place, remember, respect has no age. The group left the bar in silence, leaving some crumpled bills on the table to pay for the beers. The other customers gradually resumed their conversations, but the atmosphere had changed. There was a mix of admiration and curiosity in the air. Frank approached August, refilling his glass. This one's on the house, he said with a corner smile. August simply nodded, returning to observe the movement through the mirror. But now those who watched him closely might notice a different glint in his eyes, as if that small confrontation had awakened long dormant memories. Across the street, hidden in the shadows, Bruno watched the bar with a mix of anger and curiosity. Something about that old man intrigued him, and he was determined to find out who August really was. Little did he know that this curiosity would lead him to discover a story that would change his life forever. The morning after the incident, at the bar, Bruno couldn't get the enigmatic figure of August out of his head. Sitting in his office at his father's company, where he held a junior director position with little responsibility, he scoured the internet for any information about the mysterious old man. There's something about those tattoos, he muttered, to himself, remembering the symbols he had glimpsed the night before. Determined to find out more, Bruno did something he never imagined. He called his grandfather, Peter, an old merchant who knew every corner of the downtown area. At the same time, on the other side of the city, August followed his morning routine in the small apartment where he lived alone. The place was simple but impeccably organized, with walls decorated by old black and white photographs. In one of them, a group of young men posed in front of an old textile factory, the same one that was now a shopping mall in the heart of the city. While making his coffee, August was interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Marina, his only daughter, who always visited him on Fridays. At 35, she was a university professor and carried the same determination in her eyes as her father. "Dad, you won't believe what happened yesterday at the university," said Marina, entering and placing some shopping bags on the table. "I was teaching when a new student walked into the classroom. Guess who it was? Richard Mendez's son." August froze for a moment upon hearing that name, but maintained his composure. Richard Mendez had been his partner decades ago when they controlled the largest transportation company in the region. The partnership ended abruptly, leaving deep scars on both sides. "The world goes round, daughter," replied August, serving coffee for both of them. "What's he like?" "Different from his father, at least so far. He seems like a good kid, interested in learning, but it made me think, you never really told me what happened between you and the company." August sighed, looking out the apartment, window that overlooked the old industrial district. "Some stories are better left in the past, Marina, but know that everything I did was with your future in mind." Meanwhile, Bruno was sitting in an upscale cafe at the mall, anxiously waiting for his grandfather. Peter arrived promptly, wearing a well-tailored suit that betrayed his years as a successful merchant. "So, my grandson, why so much interest in old stories?" asked Peter after placing his order with the waiter. "Grandpa, yesterday I met an old man at Frank's bar. He had some old tattoos, numbers, and symbols. His name is August." Peter's face paled slightly. "August Soares? He still goes to that bar." "You know him?" asked Bruno, leaning over the table with renewed interest. "Know is a strong word," replied Peter, adjusting himself in his chair. "But everyone who lived in this city in the 80s and 90s knew August Soares. He and Richard Mendez built an empire from nothing. Their company, Transcontinental, was the largest transporter in the region." Bruno frowned. "Transcontinental? The same one that went bankrupt 20 years ago?" "Bankrupt isn't quite the word," Peter lowered his voice. "There was a falling out between the partners. something related to important documents and an international deal. August ended up losing everything, while Richard Mendez expanded his business into other sectors. At that same moment, back at August's apartment, Marina was preparing lunch while her father organized some old documents. Among them, a yellowed photograph caught her attention. It showed August and Richard Mendez as young men, smiling in front of a new truck with the Transcontinental logo. "Dad," she called, "why did you never try to clear your name? Prove you were right?" August carefully folded the photo and put it in a drawer. "Some victories don't need to be announced, daughter. Time is the best judge." At the mall, Bruno continued his conversation with his grandfather. But what exactly happened? How did someone so powerful end up like that? Peter took a sip of his coffee before answering. "Your father was very young at the time. Maybe he doesn't even remember properly. But they say August discovered something irregular in the international operations. When he confronted Richard, important documents mysteriously disappeared. August was accused of trying to sabotage his own company. He lost everything: money, reputation, friends. And he never tried to defend himself?" "That's the most intriguing part," said Peter, leaning forward. "He simply accepted everything in silence. Some say it was to protect someone. Others think he was holding onto some trump card. The fact is, Richard Mendez never slept peacefully again, even after becoming one of the richest men in the region." Bruno felt a shiver as he remembered August's penetrating gaze from the night before. Now he understood why that simple old man in a corner bar exuded so much authority. At August's apartment, Marina was getting ready to leave when she noticed an old folder falling from a shelf. As she picked up the scattered papers, her eyes caught something that made her stop: a set of documents with the Transcontinental letterhead and Richard Mendez's signature. "Dad," she began, but August gently took the papers from her hands. "Everything has its time, daughter," he said, carefully putting the folder away, "and maybe the time for some truths is coming." Meanwhile, Bruno said goodbye to his grandfather with his head buzzing with information. He decided to pass by Frank's bar again that night, but this time not to provoke. He wanted to understand more about that man who, according to his grandfather, had been one of the most respected businessmen in the city. What Bruno didn't know was that his curiosity was about to trigger a series of events that would bring to light long-buried secrets. Secrets that connected not only August and Richard Mendez, but also a new generation unaware of the true power of choices made in the past. That same night, Frank's bar was busier than usual. It was Friday, and a light drizzle of early winter kept people sheltered in the cozy establishment. August occupied his usual spot at the counter, but something about his posture was different. The documents Marina had found earlier had awakened, memories he preferred to keep dormant. "Another one, Frank?" he asked, spinning the empty glass on the counter. The bar owner noticed the unusual restlessness in his oldest customer, but maintained the discretion characteristic of someone who has served the same people for years. It was then that Bruno entered the bar, this time alone. He was dressed more discreetly than usual, and his expression was serious, stripped of the arrogance from the previous night. His eyes scanned the room until they found August, and he took a deep breath before approaching. "Mr. August," he called, his voice carrying a tone of respect that even surprised Frank. "May I sit?" August studied the young man for a few moments through the mirror's reflection before nodding. Bruno took the stool next to him, ordering a mineral water from Frank. "Water?" asked August, a slight ironic smile on his lips. "Different from yesterday." "I came to talk, Mr. August, and I want to be sober for that," replied Bruno, surprising the old businessman again. "I talked to my grandfather today, Peter Almeida." August nodded slowly. "Peter, it's been a while since I heard that name." "An honorable man, your grandfather. He told me a bit about you, about Transcontinental." Bruno paused, carefully choosing his next words. "And about Richard Mendez." The name hung in the air like smoke, thick and uncomfortable. At that moment, the bar door opened and Marina entered, carrying a folder under her arm. She stopped when she saw her father talking to a young man she immediately recognized. "Bruno Silva," she said, approaching the counter. "What are you doing here?" Bruno turned, surprised. "Professor Marina, you're—" "My daughter," August completed, watching the young man's reaction closely. "The world is small, isn't it?" Marina placed the folder on the counter, her eyes alternating between Bruno and her father. "So that's why you were so interested in the history of Transcontinental during class today." Bruno felt his face heat up. Indeed, after the conversation with his grandfather, he had bombarded Marina with questions about family businesses and business ethics during his organizational management class. "Actually," he began, "I came here because I want to understand something bigger that's happening in my own family." August raised an eyebrow, his interest genuinely piqued. "Go on." "My father—" Bruno hesitated but decided to proceed. "He's about to close an international partnership, something big that will change the family business group. But since the negotiations started, he's been different, anxious, worried, and last night, when I got home after being here, I overheard him arguing on the phone. He mentioned your name, Mr. August." Marina opened the folder she had brought, revealing the documents she had found earlier. "Dad, I think it's time you told me the truth. What really happened with Transcontinental?" August picked up one of the yellowed papers, his fingers lightly tracing the faded company logo. On the document, dates and container numbers formed a pattern only he fully understood. 25 years ago, he began, his voice low but clear, Transcontinental was about to go international. We had closed important contracts, opened new routes. Richard, your father, he looked at Bruno, was brilliant with numbers and strategy. I handled operations, knew every driver, every route, every client. Frank approached discreetly, serving water to Marina and refilling August's glass without him needing to ask. "That's when the inconsistencies started," August continued. "Small at first, numbers that didn't add up, incomplete shipments, confusing documentation. When I started investigating, I discovered something bigger. Richard had created a parallel accounting system, the international shipments." He stopped, abruptly, when the bar door opened again. A tall man with graying hair and an impeccable suit entered, followed by 2 bodyguards. Richard Mendez, even at 65, still maintained the imposing posture that characterized him in the Transcontinental days. The entire bar seemed to hold its breath. Bruno stood up instinctively, surprised by his father's presence. Marina stepped forward as if to protect August, but he remained seated, calmly sipping his whiskey. "So it's true," said Richard, his voice echoing in the silence that had settled. "You still have those documents?" August slowly turned on his stool, facing his former partner for the first time in over 2 decades. "Good evening, Richard. Care for a drink? On the house, right, Frank?" The bar owner nodded automatically, but Richard remained motionless. "We need to talk, August, in private." "Anything you have to say, you can say here," August replied, making a sweeping gesture with his hand. "After all, your son and my daughter are already involved. Why not make this a family matter?" The tension in the air was palpable. Bruno looked from his father to August, beginning to understand that he was in the middle of something much bigger than he had imagined. Marina held the folder with the documents firmly, her eyes alert to every movement. Richard adjusted his tie, visibly uncomfortable with the situation. "Things don't have to be this way, old friend. We can resolve this civilly." "Civilly?" August laughed without humor. "Like it was civil when you forged my signature on those contracts, or when you manipulated the evidence to frame me?" Bruno felt the ground slip from under his feet. "Dad, what is he talking about?" Richard shot a stern look at his son. "Bruno, go home. This doesn't concern you." "On the contrary," Marina intervened, opening one of the documents from the folder. "This concerns all of us, especially now that history seems about to repeat itself with this new international partnership. Isn't that right, Mr. Richard?" The silence that followed Marina's words was as thick as fog. Frank, sensing the gravity of the situation, began, discreetly asking the other customers to leave, offering apologies and courtesies for future visits. Within minutes, the bar was practically empty, except for the small group around the counter and Richard's 2 bodyguards who remained near the door. How do you know about the new partnership? Asked Richard, his eyes fixed on Marina. I'm a university professor, Mr. Mendez. Research is my specialty, she replied, maintaining her calm. And when I found these documents today, it wasn't hard to connect the dots with the recent news about your company in the specialized media. Bruno, still trying to process all the information, leaned on the counter. Dad, what's going on? What are these documents? August took one of the papers from the folder and handed it to Bruno. Your father was always brilliant with numbers. As I said, so brilliant that he could make fortunes disappear on paper and reappear in offshore accounts. That's slander, protested Richard, taking a step forward but stopping when Frank strategically positioned himself near a phone. Is it? Questioned August, his voice maintaining that characteristic calm that now seemed even more threatening. Then you won't mind if your son takes a look at these records from 1998. August continued, his voice steady but carrying an edge that made everyone in the room tense. The numbers of shipments that never reached their official destination but generated impressive profits? Bruno began examining the documents, his face gradually paling. As a business administration student, he could perfectly understand what those numbers meant. Dad, this is a complex operation to divert resources, Marina completed, pointing to other documents. The same pattern repeats across different routes, always with international destinations. And now, with the new Asian partnership, your company is about to close. Richard adjusted his suit, trying to maintain his composure. You have no idea what you're talking about. That time was different. The market was different. We did what was necessary to survive. Survive? August stood up slowly, and even though he was shorter than Richard, his presence seemed to fill the entire room. You destroyed my reputation, ended my career, cut me off from all our contacts in the market, and now you're telling me it was about survival. Bruno looked at his father, a mix of disappointment and disbelief on his face. Is that why you've been so nervous these past few weeks? The new partnership, are you planning to do the same thing again? The businessman ran a hand through his graying hair, a gesture of nervousness his son had never seen before. Things are more complicated than they seem. There are commitments, agreements. Agreements, Marina interrupted, pulling another document from the folder. Like the agreement you made with the bank to shift the blame onto my father, I have the original draft of the contract here, with your notes in the margins. Interesting how you planned every detail of the fraud. Richard glanced at his bodyguards, making a subtle gesture with his head. The men took a step forward, but Frank cleared his throat loudly, showing he also had a phone in hand. Don't make things worse, Richard, August advised. You know I have copies of these documents in safe places. I always have. It's my insurance. Policy, let's say. Then why didn't you ever use them? Richard asked, a mix of curiosity and desperation in his voice. Why wait all these years? August looked at Marina, a soft smile appearing on his lips. Because my revenge would have hurt innocent people. Your son was just a child back then, just like my Marina. I chose to protect them, even if it meant losing everything. Bruno sat down heavily on one of the bar stools, his hands trembling slightly as he held the documents. The entire empire of our family was built on fraud? Not all of it, Richard replied, his voice lower now. At first, it was just to give us a boost, create a competitive advantage, but one lie led to another, and before you realized you were addicted to easy money, August completed, and now you're about to drag your son down the same path. Marina stepped closer to Bruno, placing a hand on his shoulder in a comforting gesture. That's why I chose to become a business ethics professor, because I saw what greed can do to people, to families. And what do you plan to do with these documents now? Richard asked, trying to regain control of the situation. August exchanged a meaningful look with his daughter before answering. That depends on you, old friend. The new international partnership, you can still do the right thing this time. Bruno stood up suddenly. Dad, be honest for once. I deserve to know the truth. The partnership with the Asians, is it clean? Richard's silence was answer enough. Frank, who had been watching everything from behind the counter, began organizing some glasses, the clinking of glass the only sound in the tense room. "There's still time to fix things," August said, his voice now softer. "Not for old times. It's okay, Richard, but for the future, for your son." Marina opened her bag and pulled out more papers. "I spent the afternoon researching. The structure you set up for the new partnership has flaws. If you continue down this path, it won't be long before everything comes to light, and this time the consequences will be much worse." Bruno stared at his father, years of admiration turning into painful understanding. "Dad, you always told me that a real man owns up to his mistakes. It's time to practice what you preach." Richard Mendez had always prided himself on his self-control, but at that moment, sitting on one of the stools at Frank's bar, his hands trembled slightly as he held a glass of water. The bodyguards had been dismissed after a gesture from him, and now only the people directly involved in that story remained in the room. "You're right, Marina," he finally said, breaking the heavy silence. "The new partnership. I followed the same model as before. It was like using an old familiar map. I knew it was wrong, but it was easier than doing the right thing," Bruno completed, his voice filled with disappointment. "All those speeches about integrity and business you gave at the company, were they just empty words?" August watched the interaction between father and son with a mix of compassion and sadness. He knew exactly what it was like to lose everything, but he also knew the value of maintaining integrity. "You know, Richard," he began, spinning his glass on the counter, "I spent years imagining this moment. I had so many things I wanted to say to you, so much pent-up anger. But now, seeing your son facing the same crossroads we faced 25 years ago, I realized that revenge wouldn't bring peace to anyone." Marina stepped closer to her father, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Is that why you kept these documents all these years, waiting for this moment?" "At first, it was my guarantee of survival," August replied, looking at the papers scattered on the counter. "Later, it became a reminder of who I was, of who I didn't want to become." Frank, who had remained silent all this time, approached with a bottle of a special whiskey he kept for unique occasions. He poured a shot for each of the people present, including Bruno and Marina. "To the truth," said the bar owner, raising his own glass, "no matter how painful it may be." Richard looked at his glass but didn't touch it. "How can I fix this? The Asian partnership is practically sealed. There are contracts, commitments. There's always a way," Marina said, picking up her folder. "This afternoon, while researching, I came up with some alternatives. The partnership structure can be reorganized legitimately. It will require more work, the profits will be smaller, but it will be honest," Bruno completed, a glimmer of determination in his eyes. "Dad, I always wanted to follow in your footsteps, to be like you. Now I realize I can do it differently. We can transform the company together, do things the right way." August noticed a subtle change in Richard's expression. It was as if a mask was slowly coming off, revealing the man he had known decades ago, before ambition consumed him. "Do you remember, Richard?" August continued. "Our first truck? It was old, always breaking down, but it was ours. Earned through honest work. The sense of accomplishment we had. It was different, wasn't it?" Richard closed his eyes for a moment, diving into the memories. "The driver was old Jorge. He always said that truck had a soul." "And it did," August smiled. "Just like our partnership had a soul before we let. The numbers become more important than the people." Marina opened her folder again, spreading some new documents on the counter. "Here's a draft of how we can restructure the Asian partnership. It will require total transparency, independent audits, but it's feasible." Bruno examined the papers with genuine interest. His years of studying business administration, combined with the practical knowledge he had gained in the company, allowed him to fully understand the plan. "This could work," he said, excited. "In fact, if we implement these controls from the start, we could even attract more serious investors in the future." Richard took the documents from his son's hands, studying them carefully. His hands still trembled slightly, but there was something different in his gaze now. "August," he finally said, Why are you willing to help me after everything I did?" "I'm not helping you," August replied, looking meaningfully at Bruno and Marina. "I'm helping the next generation not to make the same mistakes we did. Besides," he paused, an enigmatic smile appearing on his lips, "maybe it's time for some old wounds to start healing." Frank served another round, and this time Richard accepted his glass. The old bar owner had witnessed countless stories unfold in his establishment over the years, but something about that night was different. It was as if time itself had decided to give everyone present a second chance. "And what about the other documents?" Richard asked, referring to the evidence of the old frauds. "They'll stay safe with me," August replied, "not as a threat but as a guarantee, a reminder of the commitment we're making here today." Bruno stood up, extending his hand to August. "Mr. August, I want to learn, not just about business, but about integrity. Would you accept being a sort of mentor to me?" The request took everyone by surprise, especially Richard. Marina watched her father with curiosity, knowing how much that moment meant to him. A week had passed since the night of revelations at Frank's bar. It was a Monday morning when August climbed the steps of the imposing building that housed the Mendez Group headquarters. The reception security guard, who had been informed of his arrival, greeted him with a respectful nod and a visitor's badge. On the 30th floor, Bruno was waiting for him in the main conference room. The young man had spent the weekend reorganizing documents and preparing presentations about the company's restructuring. His dark circles betrayed sleepless nights, but his eyes shone with determination. "Good morning, Mr. August," Bruno greeted, handing him a cup of coffee. "Thank you for coming." August looked around the room with interest. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of the city, so different from the one he had known decades ago. On the conference table, organized folders and an open laptop awaited. "You know, Bruno," August said, sitting down, 30 years ago when we started Transcontinental, our conference room was the hood of an old truck." Marina arrived shortly after, carrying her own folder of documents. As a special consultant for the restructuring project, she had dedicated every free moment of the past few days to refining the plan she had presented at the bar. "Dad, did you bring those old records you mentioned?" she asked, organizing her papers on the table. August pulled a flash drive from his jacket pocket. "I digitized everything. Thought it might be useful to have a record of what we shouldn't repeat." Richard was the last to enter the room. His face showed the weight of sleepless nights and the difficult decisions he had faced in the past week. Still, there was something different in his posture, a humility his oldest employees had never seen before. "Before we begin," Richard said, closing the door, "I want you to know that I spent the weekend talking to our legal team. They don't know everything, of course, but I gave them instructions to start preparing the necessary documentation for the restructuring." Bruno turned on the projector, and a series of charts and spreadsheets lit up the wall. "I analyzed our numbers from the last 5 years. It's possible to transition to a fully transparent model without causing a devastating impact on the business." Marina stood up, approaching the projection. "The plan I developed is divided into 3 phases. The first is the most delicate. We need to create a structure that allows the transition without raising suspicions that could harm the company's reputation." "And what about the Asian partners?" August asked, flipping through some documents. "Have they signed anything yet?" Richard shook his head. "Only preliminary agreements. The final contract was scheduled for next week, but I managed to postpone it for a month, citing the need for technical adjustments." "Good," Marina said, switching to the next slide. "That gives us time to implement the first phase. Look here, we've created a new corporate governance structure that—" The presentation was interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Sandra, Richard's secretary of over 15 years. "Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Mendez, but the external audit team has arrived for the quarterly meeting." A tense silence filled the room. The audit was precisely one of the points that needed to be carefully managed during the transition. "Have them wait in the conference room on the 29th floor," Richard instructed. "And Sandra, please cancel my afternoon appointments. This," he gestured to the gathered group, "is top priority." After the secretary left, Bruno projected a new set of data. About the audit, we've developed a plan to gradually align all procedures. It will take time, but it's possible to do this without raising red flags. August watched everything attentively, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. His decades of experience in the industry allowed him to identify potential problems and suggest practical solutions. The key, he said, standing up to point something out on the chart, is to keep the focus on people. We're not just restructuring numbers, we're restructuring trust relationships. Marina smiled, recognizing the wisdom in her father's words. That's why I suggest we start with a compliance program that goes beyond the basics. We need to create a new corporate culture. Like we did in the beginning, Richard murmured, more to himself than to the others, when we knew every driver by name, every client personally. Bruno typed something on his laptop, and a new document appeared on the screen. I've drafted an updated code of ethics for the group, and I think we should start implementing it with ourselves. How so? Richard asked. Total transparency among the four of us, Bruno explained. Every decision, every move, all documented and shared. No secrets, no shortcuts. August allowed himself a small smile. The young man who a week ago was just an arrogant playboy was turning into a conscious leader. That reminds me, Marina said, pulling something from her folder. I've drafted a commitment agreement. It's not legally binding, it's more of a moral pact between us. She distributed copies of the document. It was simple, straightforward, but loaded with meaning. A commitment to truth, to integrity, to real change. Richard was the first to pick up a pen. His hands no longer trembled as he signed the paper. Bruno followed, his signature firm and decisive. Marina signed with the elegance characteristic of her gestures. Finally, the document reached August. Before signing, he looked at each of the people present. Do you understand there's no turning back after this? That the path will be much harder than continuing as we are? That's exactly why we need to do this, Bruno replied. Because it's hard, because it's right. August signed the document, and at that moment, something subtly changed in the room's atmosphere. It was as if a new chapter was truly beginning, not just for the two families, but for everyone who would be affected by that decision. The beginning of October brought unexpected rain and the first major challenges for the Mendez Group's restructuring project. In the 30th floor conference room, now transformed into the transition headquarters, Marina was analyzing a series of concerning emails on her laptop. We have a problem, she announced as Bruno and Richard entered the room for the morning meeting. The Asians are pushing for an answer. They don't want to wait another month to close the deal. Richard ran a hand over his face, a gesture that had become more frequent in recent weeks. How much time are they willing to give us? 3 days, Marina replied, adjusting her reading glasses. And there's more, they sent a revised proposal. The terms are even more aggressive than before. Bruno leaned over to read the emails over Marina's shoulder. This doesn't make sense. Why would they increase their demands now? Because we're not the only ones who know how to play this game, August said, entering the room. Even after 2 weeks of working together, his presence still commanded respectful silence. They've noticed our hesitation and are testing our limits. Richard picked up his own folder, pulling out some documents. There's another complication. Jorge Silva, our CFO, is asking questions about the changes in internal procedures. He's been with me for 15 years. He knows many of the shortcuts we used to take. Is he a threat? Bruno asked, his voice betraying concern. Jorge isn't a bad person, Richard replied, but he built his career on the old system. A change of this magnitude, he might feel cornered. Marina closed her laptop with a frustrated sigh. And we can't just remove him without raising suspicions. He knows too much. August poured himself a cup of coffee, watching the city through the window. The rain created hypnotic patterns on the glass, like tears from an invisible giant. When we started Transcontinental, he said, still looking at the city, we had to deal with a tax supervisor. He found some inconsistencies in our early records. Richard visibly stiffened in his chair. It was the first time August had directly mentioned past events since the night at the bar. How did you handle it? Bruno asked, genuinely curious. I wanted to use traditional methods, August continued, turning to face the group. But your father, Richard, had a different idea. He invited the man to tour our operation, showed him every detail of the business, explained our challenges. In the end, the supervisor not only gave us time to fix everything, but also helped us find legal ways to optimize our taxes. Marina frowned, thoughtful. Are you suggesting we be completely honest with Jorge? I'm suggesting that sometimes transparency, even if scary, is the best strategy, August replied. Bruno began pacing the room, his mind working quickly. What if we used the same approach with the Asians? How so? Richard asked. Instead of trying to buy time or make excuses, we could propose a joint audit, Bruno explained, his voice gaining enthusiasm. Open our real books, show we're committed to ethical practices, turn our apparent weakness into a strength. Marina started typing rapidly on her laptop. That could work. In fact, if we present it correctly, we could use this to strengthen our position in the negotiations. But what about the old records? Richard questioned, his concern evident. A joint audit could expose... Not necessarily, August interrupted, pulling out the flash drive he always carried. I've spent the last few days organizing a timeline. We can establish a 0 point for the transition, using the old records as a baseline to demonstrate our change in direction. The sound of rain against the windows was the only thing that could be heard. As everyone processed the idea, it was Jorge Silva who broke the silence, entering the room without knocking. Sorry to interrupt, he said, his face tense, but I need to talk about the changes in the audit procedures. There are things that don't add up. Richard exchanged quick glances with the others before making a decision. Jorge, please sit down. We have a lot to discuss. Marina began gathering her documents, but August gestured for her to stay. He needs to hear your perspective too, Marina. Everyone here has an important role in what's to come. Jorge looked confused at the group, especially at August, whom he didn't know. I don't understand. What's going on here? What's happening? Is a revolution, Jorge, Bruno replied, his voice firm, and we want you to be part of it. The rain outside intensified, as if nature itself wanted to create a curtain of privacy for the conversation about to take place. At Frank's bar, several blocks away, the old owner wiped down the counter where it had all begun, unaware that another decisive chapter was unfolding on that rainy morning. Jorge Silva remained silent for long minutes after hearing the whole story. The CFO of the Mendez Group, known for his precision with numbers and absolute discretion, now found himself at a crossroads he had never imagined facing. Let me see if I understand, he finally said, adjusting his tie nervously. You want to completely restructure our operations, abandon the established practices, and even propose a joint audit with the Asians? Exactly, Bruno confirmed, who had taken the lead in the explanation. And we need your experience to make this work. Jorge stood up, walking to the window. The rain had lessened, but the sky remained heavy. Do you have any idea what this means? It's not just about changing some numbers on spreadsheets. We're talking about a complete transformation in how we operate. That's why we need you, Marina said, opening her laptop to show some charts. Your experience can help us make this transition as smooth as possible. August, who had been observing everything with his experienced gaze, noticed something shift in Jorge's expression. It was as if a long-closed door was beginning to open. You know, Jorge began, turning to face the group, 3 years ago, my daughter started college for accounting. She keeps asking me about business ethics, about how we handle complex situations. I always change the subject. Richard, who had known Jorge for so long, immediately understood the weight of that confession. I've also been avoiding certain conversations with Bruno for years, but now we have the chance to do things differently. And what about the investors? Jorge questioned. Some of them are accustomed to our extraordinary returns. We might lose some, Bruno admitted, but we'll gain others. Those who value sustainability and corporate governance. Marina projected a new presentation on the screen. I've analyzed the market. There's a growing movement of institutional investors focused on companies with solid ESG practices. Our transparency could position us as leaders in that segment. Jorge sat down again, now with a different expression. I'll need a dedicated team. Trusted people who can help with the transition without causing internal panic. Choose whoever you want, Richard authorized. But remember, from now on, trust means integrity, not complicity. August stood up, walking to the center of the room. When we built Transcontinental, we made mistakes because we thought there was no other way. Today you have the opportunity to prove there's a better way. Marina's phone rang, interrupting the moment. It was an email from the Asian partners, pressing again for an answer. They want a video conference this afternoon, she informed. They say it's the last chance before they look for other partners. Bruno surprised everyone by smiling. Perfect, let's do it right now. Now? Richard questioned, worried. Shouldn't we prepare better? No, Bruno replied with conviction. If we're starting a new era of transparency, let it be now. Jorge, can you prepare an honest presentation of our real numbers in 2 hours? The CFO hesitated for a moment, but then his eyes lit up with a new purpose. I can do better. I have a parallel version of the books that I keep, for safety. It shows exactly where we are and where we could be with fully legitimate operations. Marina, Bruno continued, energized. Can you adapt your restructuring plan to include the Asians as partners in the transformation process? Already working on it, she replied, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Richard watched his son with a mix of pride and apprehension. Are you sure about this, Bruno? It's a huge risk. It's a necessary risk, August interjected. And you're not alone. If you'll allow me, I'd like to join this video conference. As a senior consultant for the transformation project, Marina added, smiling. The next 2 hours were a whirlwind of activity. Jorge and his trusted team worked on the real numbers. Marina and Bruno refined the presentation, while Richard and August prepared the negotiation strategy. When the time came for the video conference, the room felt different. It wasn't just the organization of documents or the arrangement of people around the table. There was something in the air, an energy of shared purpose. Before we begin, August said, looking at each person present, I want you to know that, regardless of the outcome, you've already won, because you chose the harder path, but the only one that lets you sleep with a clear conscience. Jorge looked at his phone, where there was an unread message from his daughter. Maybe, he said, putting the phone away, it's time to have that conversation about business ethics with her. The video conference screen lit up, showing the serious faces of the Asian executives. Bruno took a deep breath, adjusted his tie, and began. Gentlemen, we appreciate the opportunity for this meeting. What we're presenting today isn't just a business proposal, but an invitation to be part of something truly transformative. The presentation to the Asian executives lasted 3 hours and 17 minutes. When the video conference screen finally went dark, a heavy silence filled the meeting room. On the other side of the world, the YK Corp Board of Directors would need 48 hours to evaluate the Mendes Group's new proposal. They barely said anything during the entire presentation, Marina observed, organizing her notes. Is that good or bad in their culture? August, who had remained silent since the end of the call, allowed himself a small smile. They weren't expecting this. No one expects a company to completely open its operations like that. Jorge was still absorbed in his laptop, reviewing the numbers he had presented. You know, in 15 years of preparing financial reports, this was the first time I didn't have to create 2 versions of the same document. The door to the room opened, and Sandra, Richard's secretary, entered hurriedly. Mr. Mendes, the people from the Economy and Business newspaper are on the line. They say they've received information about possible irregularities in the group's international operations. The blood froze in everyone's veins. Bruno was the first to recover from the shock. Who else knows about today's meeting? Just the people in this room and my trusted team, Jorge replied, closing his laptop. And the Asians, of course. Richard picked up the phone, his hand slightly trembling. Sandra, tell them I'll call back in 15 minutes. As soon as the secretary left, Marina began typing furiously on her computer. This isn't a coincidence. Someone is trying to pressure us. The question is, who? August asked, standing up to look out the window at the city. The sky had cleared, but dark clouds still loomed on the horizon. And why now? Bruno began pacing the room, his brain working at full speed. Think about it. Who would lose the bee most with our change of direction? The list is long, Jorge replied, opening a folder on his computer. We have partners in various operations who, let's say, benefit from the current system. Richard, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. There's more. Sandra told me earlier that Carlos Vieira has been trying to schedule an urgent meeting. Carlos Vieira? Marina questioned. The same one who... Yes, Richard interrupted. My former partner in the Paraguay operations. August turned sharply. Vieira has always been the weakest link in the chain. He knows too much about the old operations and has nothing to lose. But how did he find out about today's meeting? Bruno asked. Jorge cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. My team, one of the people who helped prepare the numbers. She dated Vieira's son for a while. Great, Marina sighed. So now we have an internal leak and the press sniffing around. Not to mention the Asians deciding if we're crazy or just naive, Bruno added. Richard picked up his phone again, but August stopped him. Wait, before we respond to anything, we need a plan. What plan? Richard asked, his voice betraying concern. If this story leaks now, in the middle of the transition... What if? Marina interrupted, her eyes shining with a sudden idea. Instead of reacting, we got ahead of it. Everyone turned to her, intrigued. Explain, August requested, recognizing in his daughter's eyes the same determination he had in his youth. What if, she continued, projecting a blank document on the screen, instead of waiting for the story to leak, we told it ourselves, in our own way, on our own terms. Bruno began to understand where she was going. A full transparency offensive? Exactly, Marina confirmed. We prepare an official statement explaining the transformation the group is undergoing. We focus on the courageous decision to change, the pursuit of more ethical practices. This is madness, Richard protested. The shareholders will freak out. Maybe, Jorge replied, surprising everyone. Or maybe it's exactly what we need. Think about it. The numbers we presented to the Asians today show we can be profitable, even operating completely legally. August approached the table, his eyes fixed on the blank document projected on the screen. 25 years ago, I lost everything by refusing to participate in a scheme. Today, you have the chance to turn a potential crisis into an opportunity for redemption. Bruno was already typing on his tablet. We can organize a press conference for tomorrow morning. We present our vision before others tell the story for us. The Asians, Marina reminded. How would this affect the negotiation? It might be exactly what they need to see, August replied. In their culture, publicly admitting mistakes and showing commitment to change is seen with respect. Richard ran a hand through his graying hair, weighing each word. If we do this, there's no turning back. We'll be exposed not just to the press, but to investigations, audits. Dad, Bruno interrupted, his voice firm. There's been no turning back since that night at Frank's bar. The only question is, are we going to let others control our narrative, or are we going to write our own story? The phone on the table rang again. It was Sandra, informing that 2 more media outlets had contacted them. Time was running out. Jorge looked at his watch and then at the photo of his daughter on his phone's lock screen. You know what? I'm tired of having 2 versions of everything in my life. I'm in. Marina was already structuring the official statement, her fingers flying over the keyboard. We need all departments aligned. Jorge, is your team ready? I'll call them right now, he replied, picking up his phone. Bruno turned to August. We'll need you by our side tomorrow. Your story, your experience. People need to understand this change is genuine. August nodded, a different glint in his eyes. I'll be there, but first I think we all need a drink. Richard looked at his former partner, understanding immediately. Frank's bar? Frank's bar, August confirmed, where it all began and where perhaps a new chapter is about to be written. Frank's bar was practically empty that night. as if fate itself wanted to ensure privacy for the group gathered near the counter. The old bar owner watched with interest as Marina typed the final adjustments to the official statement on her laptop. Bruno reviewed the presentation for the next morning's press conference, and Jorge finalized the financial reports that would be released. "Done," Marina said, turning the laptop so everyone could see. "The statement is finalized." August put on his reading glasses and began reading aloud. "The Mendez Group announces today a historic transformation in its operations. Committed to the highest standards of corporate governance and transparency, the group begins a new phase." "Are you sure you want to do this?" Frank interrupted, serving a round of drinks. "I've known you all for so long. I know how much you've built, how much you could lose." Richard picked up his glass, observing the amber liquid as if seeking answers in it. "You know, Frank, I spent 30 years building an empire. But only now do I understand that the true legacy isn't in the numbers of a bank account. It's about doing the right thing," Bruno completed, looking at August with admiration. "Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Marina's phone rang. It was an email from YK Corp. Everyone held their breath as she read. They want to move up their response," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "They're asking for another video conference now." Jorge checked his watch. "It's 3 a.m. in Tokyo. If they want to talk now, it must be important," August observed. "Frank, can we use the back room?" The bar owner nodded, guiding them to a small room he normally used for closing the cash register. Within minutes, Marina's laptop was connected, showing the serious faces of the Asian executives. What followed surprised everyone. YK Corp's CEO, Mr. Tanaka, spoke in precise English. "We received calls today, people trying to warn us about alleged irregularities in the Mendez Group." Richard paled, but before he could speak, Mr. Tanaka continued, "In 40 years of business, I've never seen a company do what you did today. Voluntarily expose your weaknesses, commit to real change. This is Giri." Marina quickly translated, "For the others, Giri is a Japanese concept of duty, honor, and moral integrity. That's why," the executive continued, "YK Corp not only maintains its interest in the partnership, but wants to expand its participation. We want to be part of this transformation." The back room of Frank's bar erupted in restrained smiles and sighs of relief. After finalizing the call with the agreed details, the group returned to the counter with renewed energy. "This changes everything," Jorge said, reviewing his numbers. "With the Asians' support, other investors will want in. As long as we maintain our commitment to transparency," Bruno reminded. "We can't turn back now." August smiled, remembering something. "You know, when I lost everything 25 years ago, I thought it was the end. But today I see it was just the beginning of a bigger story." Marina hugged her father, her eyes misty. "You never lost what truly mattered. Your integrity is worth more than any empire." Richard extended his hand to his former partner. "Forgive me, August, for everything." "It's not about forgiveness, Richard," August replied, shaking the offered. "Knazan, it's about redemption, and you're on the right path now." Frank approached with a special bottle. "This is the same brand you drank when you started Transcontinental," he said, pouring shots for everyone. "I saved it for a special occasion." Bruno raised his glass. "To transparency. To integrity," Marina added. "To the future," Jorge said. "To second chances," Richard chimed in. August looked at each of them before raising his own glass. "To the courage to do what's right." The next morning, the Mendez Group's press conference packed the main auditorium. Journalists, shareholders, and onlookers watched as Richard and Bruno, flanked by Marina, Jorge, and August, announced the biggest transformation in the company's history. The next day's headlines surprised the market. Mendez Group announces ethical business revolution. YK Corp increases investment in historic partnership. From Transcontinental to the future, a story of business redemption. Weeks later, Frank's bar gained a new photograph on its wall of memories. In it, two groups once separated by decades of resentment now stood united, smiling, raising their glasses in a toast to the future. Below the photo, a simple inscription, "Where second chances begin." And so, in that same bar where it had all, started with a confrontation between an arrogant young man and a mysterious old man. A new story of transformation and redemption was written, not just for the Mendez and Suarez families, but for everyone who believes it's never too late to choose the right path. Dear listeners, we hope the journey of transformation of August, Richard, Bruno, Marina, and Jorge has touched your hearts. This story reminds us that there's always time to start over, to choose the path of integrity, even when it seems impossible. If you identified with our narrative, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give it a like. We have many more inspiring stories to share with you. And don't forget to tell us in the comments, which moment touched your heart the most? From which city are you following us? Your opinion is very important to us. See you next time.